Well, my next guest says the UK economy has effectively flatlined. Opposition Treasury spokesperson Ed Balls joins me now from Westminster. Thank you so much for being on the show. Now, 0.2%, I guess it's still better than any sort of contraction. When do you believe the UK economy will start to grow significantly? So not this sluggish recovery that we're seeing at the moment.
Well, I think it should be growing now, and that's part of the problem. It's not just this one quarter of 0.2%. If you look across the whole of the last 9 months, there's barely been any growth at all, just 0.2% over 9 months. Compared to the previous 9 months, it was over 2%. We had a strengthening recovery a year ago. That's now being choked off in the last 9 months, and the reason is because we've got to get deficits down. It's the same debate in Britain and in America, but if you try and do it too quickly, if you crush confidence, if you depress consumers and businesses, the result is the economy stops growing, and if that happens, to be honest, borrowing goes up.
And it's a very, very tricky situation, but certain investors and certainly economists seem to say, well, at least the bond vigilantes that we're seeing elsewhere in Europe and sometimes in the US, especially if they don't get this debt agreement, we're not seeing here in the UK because the government has taken some proactive choices.
But look, it's important to get a plan in America. Everybody wants that. In Europe, there's real issues around the Eurozone and the way in which that's operating and the way in which that's causing difficulties for southern European economies. But Britain has got a plan, and it had a plan, and we're not in the Eurozone. And our long-term interest rates, like America, have been low for the last couple of years because we're outside the Eurozone. But what markets know is that you need a plan. It's also got to work. And the common theme across Greece, Portugal, now in Britain as well, is that if your economies are not growing, it's very, very hard to get deficits down. And I think there's a real read across into the American debate. As I read the American debate, there was a steady approach to deficit reduction. Ben Bernanke has always said we've got to get the economy growing and get the deficit down steadily over the next decade or more. Suddenly, in the last few months, there's been a big row in Congress, the Republicans demanding faster action now. And what's happened in America? Big fall in confidence, big fall in growth. I'm afraid if you try and go too fast with these things, if you're reckless, if you can't get an agreement, or if you go and try and go too fast, I'm afraid you crush growth, and that makes it harder to get the deficit down. So a balanced approach is the better way forward. We've not got that here in Britain, and our economy is flatlined.
I mean, at the same time, the US was actually growing their economy through extra stimulus. Ed Balls, what happens on August the 3rd if the US can't find a debt agreement? What happens to the UK economy and markets in general?
Well, I've been an observer of the American economy for 30 years. I worked for the Financial Times before coming into politics, and many, many times we've had last-minute deals, concerns in advance, brinkmanship, the White House and Congress having to finally get things sorted out. I have to say, this time, people seem to be pushing it very late indeed, and we all hope that the Republicans in Congress are not going to lose sight of the bigger picture. The world needs America to be growing, to be stable, to have a sensible deficit reduction plan, not going too fast. I'm afraid if America can't get this sorted out, it's disastrous for the world, but so is it true in Europe. We need to have a Eurozone deal which is credible and holds, and there's still a question mark there. My criticism of George Osborne here in Britain is that when you've got these hurricanes and pressures brewing in other parts of the world, in the run-up to a hurricane, the one thing you don't do is dismantle the foundations of your own house.
Ed Balls,
and that's what he did.
I actually wanted to get your point of view on something that George Osborne said today. He said, actually, the UK at the moment is a safe haven of international stability. Is this concerning? Because if it is a safe haven, then the pound is going to go up and this is going to hurt your exports.
Well, look, a safe haven of stability is not really consistent with an economy which has barely grown at all in 9 months. If stable means zero growth, I think in the end the markets will think that's not really the kind of stability we want. We want stronger growth. That's the way to get the deficit down, I actually think the markets will take fright if they don't think the British economy will grow. And therefore our deficit and borrowing problems will get worse.
And do you have an ideal level of where you'd like to see the pound at the moment? I'm just looking at levels around 163.80 something. Is this comfortable for UK growth in the future, or does it need to come down a touch?
Look, I think one of the great advantages for Britain being outside the Eurozone is it was possible for our exchange rate to fall as we address these issues. The difficulty for the government is that manufacturing output is now falling, and you wouldn't really want that to be happening if the exchange rate was coming down. So I think the real question is, why aren't businesses investing and delivering those exports? Partly a world issue, partly though what's happening here in the UK. I think politicians are always...
But then what about, Ed Balls, quantitative easing? Why not try and get the Bank of England to be a little bit more creative and pump extra money into this economy?
Well, we have an independent Bank of England. They will do quantitative easing if that's the right thing to do. Already our interest rates are very low. And I think when you've got an independent bank, you have to be careful as a politician to tell them what to do. But of course, the point is, the reason why the Bank of England has got all the pressure on them to try and kickstart growth is because our fiscal policy is so negative for growth. Today we saw on the front of the Daily Telegraph here in Britain, the Prime Minister's office saying to the Chancellor, get on with it and jumpstart growth. So far, there's been no sign from our Chancellor that he's listening, but we'll keep the pressure on. I think the world needs Britain to do well, as well as an American deal.
In 20 seconds, Vince Cable said there's no need for a plan B. What would your plan B be if you were in charge? Vince
Cable a year ago said there was a need for a plan B. He was right then. He should be saying the same thing now. I think we should slow down the pace of deficit reduction and do it in a balanced way. I think the VAT rise in Britain in January was a catastrophe, and we should now reverse that temporarily. We should repeat the bank bonus tax to get young people back to work. We've got to get this economy growing. Without a plan for growth, we can't get our deficit down.
Yeah. Ed Balls, thank you so much. It is certainly a difficult equation, no matter where on the political spectrum you actually stand. Ed Balls there.